Alan Wake is haunting. It's cerebral. It's mind-bending, and it's heart-pounding. Inspired by a mix of Twin Peaks, Stephen King novels, and even one of my favorite shows, Lost, the story of Alan Wake is one that will sit with you long after you put the controller down. Developed by Remedy, Alan Wake is a mysterious thriller that originally came out in 2010 on the Xbox 360, and it reviewed well enough, and it's sitting on an 83 on Metacritic, but considering some of the other games that came out this year, it probably got a little bit overshadowed, but that didn't stop this game from developing a strong cult following, eventually leading to the greenlighting of a sequel. So I wanted to see for myself, is Alan Wake worth all the hype? Dr. Pooplove here, and that's what I hope to find out. So let's grab a flashlight and take a trip to Bright Falls to defeat the darkness and survive the hostile farm equipment. I will critique the gameplay, the story, and even the DLC to see what holds up and what doesn't. And stick around until the very end because we will be deciding once and for all where Alan Wake belongs on the ultimate video game tier list. Now, before I fully jump in, I should probably mention I'm playing the remastered version on the PS5. This version does provide a number of enhancements over the original. There is 60 FPS, there's higher fidelity, and there's even haptic support for the PS5 controller. Alan Wake's character model has also been changed a little bit to look more like the live action actor that we see throughout the game. There's also a notable absence of real brands that were in the original, like the Energizer batteries. It's much more generic in the remaster. And the UI has had some tweaks as well, but nothing too significant. And I honestly love how this game starts.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end. My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer.
We have a narration that sets a bit of the vibe and the mood of the game, showing bits and pieces of the Pacific Northwest locale. The mention of Stephen King right away reinforces the inspiration, and this line really says it all.
The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest, and it's what we'll remember in the end.
It's something that basically tells you that not every mystery will be solved and wrapped up nicely by the very end of the game. And in this section, they also zoom in on the lighthouse, which feels like a super important symbol, but we will see how that actually plays into the story. Now, from here, we jump right into the thick of the night without a whole lot of context as to what is going on. This really sets up the mystery that will unfold before you. And this was actually my first playthrough of the game, by the way, so I was really gripped from the start, wondering what would happen. And this is our first introduction to titular character Alan Wake, who just ran over a hitchhiker on the highway. It's a pretty traumatic beginning, to be honest, but the guy disappears and Wake's car is totaled. So he ends up going on foot, only to find that the guy that he just ran over is now chasing him down like some mindless zombie. It is kind of funny that he runs away right away rather than thinking, hey, maybe the guy I just ran over is alive and trying to get my attention, but he probably sees some signs that this is not going to go well, so he runs. And this whole section of the game is basically the tutorial section. It's setting up how you will need to play as you navigate the darkness. And one thing about Alan Wake is it has some very interesting mechanics that put a different kind of twist on the third-person shooter. You have this flashlight, which is pivotal to fighting the enemies. The light from it is used to expel the darkness from them, and you will see this as a circle of light closing and closing. And only when you have fully closed that circle can you damage them with a weapon. This definitely adds an interesting and engaging layer and kind of puzzle to defeating enemies, or the Taken as they're called in this game, because you have to switch back and forth between your light and firepower. And it's this really engaging kind of combat that I think it just kind of plays with your brain in interesting ways. Now, you can hip fire your light source for some effect, but aiming in will boost the light, giving you more power, but also this will deplete your battery. And you also have some recharges in the form of batteries that you can use to give you a little bit extra light power when you do run out. But it only gives you a little bit of juice, which totally makes sense that new batteries would only give you partial juice, but you just kind of have to get over that. And the only way you can really fully charge your flashlight is if you just release your aim and let the light bar come back. Now, once the darkness is expelled, you can actually aim in and shoot with your weapon of choice. The light beam is actually acting as your reticle to tell you which direction you're going to be firing in. Now you also have this dodge, which you can use to avoid close range attacks as well as axes that are being thrown at you. And a well-timed dodge will result in this bullet time slow-mo, which calls back a little bit to Remedy's other game, Max Payne. And by doing this, it allows you to plan your moves just a little bit. Now, there are no health packs to get. Health just regenerates, but it's slowly, so you need to avoid getting hurt for a while for it to come back to full. And so with all of these different mechanics you have at your disposal, you basically have to figure out this good kind of rhythm to make it all work for you. This is something I didn't really discover for a while, but I will talk more about that as we go. So with the basics all set up, you are left to make your way to the lighthouse. And when you do, it reveals that this was all just a nightmare. But this will all come into play later. And so you're woken up by Alice, your muse, your lover, and you are on a ferry making your way to Bright Falls, this sleepy town in the Pacific Northwest. It's very reminiscent of Twin Peaks, which of course was direct inspiration. Now, another inspiration was the show Lost, which was also inspired by Twin Peaks, but it's something that I'm a little bit more familiar with. And beyond the similarities in setting up a bunch of mysteries that you want to uncover, there's another element from Lost I noticed here. As you're in the ferry, and as you enter into the diner, you meet a ton of characters, and most of these people, just like Lost, these characters will end up having a significant role, and you will encounter them later in your journey. In fact, the vast majority of important characters in this game are either seen or at least referenced in the first moments, in your first day in Bright Falls. But there's actually also a very clear reason why these are the characters who feature prominently in the rest of the story, but we'll get to that later. Now, what also becomes clear is how important Alan Wake is himself. He is a famous writer of the Alex Casey series of mystery thriller novels, and people in town recognize him right away. He even has some superfans like Rose.
Alan Wake? Oh God, I am your biggest fan. I know people say that all the time, but I really am.
I'm glad to hear that.
Now, you're in the diner to look for Carl Stuckey, who is supposed to give you keys to your cabin, but instead, this mysterious lady gives them to you. And as you head on your way, the mystery continues as it's revealed that those weren't even the keys. Carl Stuckey has just run after you trying to give them to you. But you somehow go to the cabin anyways, and it's beautiful. But Alan can be a bit brash, he can be a bit moody, and he gets into a fight pretty quickly with Alice because she's trying to have Alan see a shrink, basically. He's had writer's block and these moods, and she's trying to help him, but he's not having any of it. So after storming out, trying to vent some steam, he hears Alice's voice crying for help and rushes to see her seemingly being dragged into the lake. Alan dives after her, but a few moments later, we're suddenly in a car crash. At this point, things are feeling a little bit disjointed, but it will all make sense later. And, well, I went the wrong way here. Now, when you get here, one thing that this mission sets up is something that good video games do well, and that is having this environmental marker guiding your path. Alan is determined to try to get help by making his way to the gas station, and you can see the lights from it as you make your way, as you head down. And this gives you a nice indication of the general direction that you should be heading at all times. Now, pretty soon you encounter your first manuscript page, which really enhances the overall mystery of this game, and I love it. The page has the name Departure, the name of Alan's next planned novel. But the thing is, he hasn't written it yet. And as you're going, you collect more pages, and what happens is the words that are written are describing events that are about to happen to you in the game. Like the first page that describes a character holding an axe, and then only moments later, you run into a crazed Carl Stuckey holding an axe. This furthers the mystery, and it becomes an interesting story dynamic throughout the game. It's something that works very well when it works, but there are other times that I don't like it, or I wish that they had used it slightly differently. In one way, it foreshadows the danger around you, and it reinforces the writing and the novelization theme of this game. And of course, hearing Wake reading the pages never gets old.
The Taken stood before me. It was impossible to focus on it, as if it stood in a blind spot caused by a brain tumor and eye disease. It was bleeding shadows like ink underwater. like a cloud of blood from a shark bite.
But then there are other times where it kind of feels like those pages are spoiling the game and spoiling moments that I don't even know are about to happen. And in this way, it sometimes lessens the thrill and lessens the mystery. There are a couple other moments that I think work well and don't work as well, and I will highlight those as we get to them. Eventually though, you get your flashlight and your gun, and you have to think back to that nightmare because this is how you're gonna have to use it. You start fighting off what are called the Taken. And in these early stages, you're still kind of getting used to the mechanics. But as I'm making my way through, I notice this yellow paint with arrows. And this is the game's way of pointing me towards something. I loved how it didn't show up until I really shone my flashlight on it. It lets me know that exploration would be something important. And this kind of teaches you that, yes, you should be kind of shining your light around to get a little bit of these sort of clues, this yellow painting. And usually when you see this yellow painting, it's leading to more supplies. These opportunities will pop up often throughout the games, and it's often worth, even though sometimes a wave of Taken will come for you, oftentimes the risk is still worth the reward. And in this first area is where I found a flare gun, which I honestly thought, I don't know why I thought this, but I figured would work as intended. So I shot it up into the sky, hoping that maybe I could be rescued. Of course, that wasn't what happened. I would find out later how powerful this flare gun would be and how to use it correctly. And this is where I come to another criticism that I have of the game. And that is when you do run out of ammo, you can't really do anything to defeat the Taken. I would have appreciated, honestly, if they had some sort of a melee or something you could do that maybe isn't as strong, but at least something that you can do to defeat them. Of course, you can run to the nearest light source, but you have limited sprint, and dodging only kind of works against like the first swipe. It's hard to dodge attacks twice in a row, and this just all makes running away kind of a hard tactic to do right. So yeah, I just would have liked something like a punch you could do that would just do a minimal amount of damage, or something that would make the job easier. I'm sure there are some methods that people have found, but it wasn't totally evident. Now, after making my way a little bit, I ended up getting totally lost. I wasn't sure which direction to head, and I was completely oblivious to the fact that there's actually a radar in the top left-hand corner of the screen, and it was telling me where to go at basically all times. Once I discovered this, I didn't really get lost again. It even works a little too well at times, telling me exactly where I need to go. But yeah, once I figured this out, I didn't really get lost again, but it did take me a little while to figure this out. Eventually, I made my way to the encounter with Stucky. I got through the Stucky fight, and this is where I used my flare gun to finish him off and started realizing how powerful it could be. And also that Alan Wake was really good at killing. Once I defeated Stucky, I got to the gas station and I realized that a whole week had gone by that I didn't know about. And I met the sheriff, and everything went just like this manuscript page that I had read before, that I would meet her and that I would lie. But when discussing the cabin on Cauldron Lake, it's revealed that did exist in the past, but that it was lost in a flood years ago. And this cliffhanger ends episode 1. And I honestly love this. I love how this created a serialized novel nature to this game, with each episode trudging further and further along to the eventual ending, and ending on some sort of a cliffhanger that really gripped me, really made me want to tune in to find out what happens. There are a total of 6 episodes in the main game of Alan Wake, but there's also 2 special episodes that I actually think are just as vital to the main game. So we're definitely going over those in this deep dive. But now we're at episode 2. And this starts us in a flashback in Alan's New York apartment that he shares with Alice. This is where we start getting a little bit more of Alan's backstory. We get to see some of his main work in the Alex Casey thriller series. We see that the latest novel is called The Sudden Stop, and I also like that he's got some nice golden guns. He brews some coffee, which is also something that you collect a lot. Coffee thermoses are found throughout the game, and it's apparently an homage to Twin Peaks and how much coffee they drink in that show. Kind of also makes sense with the kind of Washington, Seattle-ish locale. Now, soon the power goes out, and this reveals how much darkness really scares Alice. She really has this fear of total darkness, and it makes the fact that she is lost in the darkness even scarier, emphasizing that this is one of her main fears. And this is important. Alan makes up a story about a clicker that his mom gave him as a kid that he would click on to bring the light and expel all the monsters in the darkness. This will play into the game later. But soon we're in the present, and Alan is at the police station where the local doctor is taking a look at him. Walking through the police station, we run into Mrs. Weaver, daughter, who is obsessed with lights. And it's clear at this point that she knows something about what lurks in the darkness.
Have you started looking for my wife yet?
Alan is getting pretty aggressive at this point with everyone he's talking to. It makes sense because he's missing his wife, but I think it also emphasizes that he's a bit of a hothead, and he ends up getting a call from someone claiming to have his wife kidnapped. It's a bit weird that he doesn't trust the police at all, but at the same time, so much weird stuff has happened that I guess he would kind of sound crazy. Alan finds out that he needs to get to the park to meet Alice's kidnapper, and as you walk back into the police station, you go through the darkness of the jail cells, and the TV acts up. It's something that they use a lot of through the game. When you find a TV, it shows you Wake in this room writing a story, seeming to go crazy. And we see bits and pieces of this throughout the game. I really like this. I really like how it shows him going a bit crazy, and there's a bit of a mystery as to when this is all taking place, but those are all revealed later. Now, in these TV sections, they're actually using live action here, and they're using the actor Ilka Villi to portray Wake. But this is not to be confused with Matthew Peretta, who is the voice of Alan Wake. And this is where we meet Dr. Hartman. And Alan is still very aggressive at this point. He even punches him when he realizes who this is. And just when things are starting to get heated, this is where we meet the absolute best character in Alan Wake.
Get your hands off of my client!
Who are you?
I'm Barry Wheeler, his agent.
Barry Wheeler is essentially the comic relief, but he's also Alan's confidant in this game, and we're gonna find out much later he's also this hardcore badass as well. And of course he drives a Hummer. So we're gonna stay at this lodge for the night, and we get the keys where we're staying from none other than the ranger who we met at Bright's Diner. And Alan goes out alone at night to meet the kidnapper at Lover's Peak. Now, one very tiny detail that I don't even know if a lot of people can pick up on this, but I love this so much, is you're making your way into this one cabin and you're grabbing some ammo, but in the window you can see a scary figure for a brief moment walk by. And it makes you really afraid to leave the cabin because you think he's waiting for you. And then you leave the cabin and he's just not there, which makes it almost even creepier because it just reinforces that these crazy Taken can come for you at any moment. On my way down, I go to another cabin, and this is showing Night Springs on the TV. And this is some sort of a Twilight Zone type show, which I'm certain is a bit of another inspiration, and it's echoing a bit of the weird things going on. And fun fact that Wake actually ended up writing a little bit for this show. Another thing I love is that they really emphasize the fact that lights are your source of safety. And so they have these moments every once in a while where they end up going out, and all of a sudden you're in danger. It reminds you not to trust anything in the dark, and it also keeps you on your toes. Now, eventually you meet up with the ranger that you find is in trouble, and so you have to try to save him. The ranger found this page of Alan's manuscript, and everything had happened just as he read it. This is where you come across these oily patches, which Alan describes as liquid darkness. And these show up occasionally throughout the game. They're not really a huge deal though. You don't want to touch them as they'll hurt you, but you can use your light to remove these from your path. Now, Rusty the Ranger was fine, but now he's been taken by the darkness. So now you have to fight him as he whooshes around the arena. And really what you just have to do is kind of work with your flashlight to try to close his circle. And his circle lasts a little bit longer than most enemies, but eventually you can do it, and then he's pretty easy to take out from there. Now, after this, I get to this point where I just don't have that much ammo, and there are too many guys, including this big brute, and I ran into a lot of trouble here. Again, I wish they had some melee or something you could do when you run out of ammo, but eventually I just sloppily decided to try to run to the light, and that worked. And really, after this point though, I made a much more of a conscious effort to try to fill up on ammo so I didn't get caught in these situations. And to be honest, this was actually the last moment in the game that I really had an ammo issue. I'm not sure if I had been a little too cavalier or I just didn't take enough time to explore, but after this point, I was just pretty good on ammo. And this is why you really should follow those yellow lights for the supply boxes. It's really just worth the risk because it gives you that little bit of extra stock so that you don't have this issue. But also, just trying to make all your shots count is important as well. Now, I took the bridge over to Lover's Peak and some birds make it crash. And I end up getting saved by this military guy, the same guy from the ferry. And Alan pretty quickly realizes that he's the kidnapper. It might have been nice to leave this a little mysterious, but it's okay. And this is where we get flares. At first, I didn't really realize to actually use my flares, but eventually I understood. You hold R1 to ignite a flare and basically create a light shield around you, which none of the Taken will dare cross. And I like how the game strips you of your guns at this point and forces you to use flares in these sections because it really just lets you get used to this new mechanic. And it does become become very important throughout the game, especially whenever I get rushed or surrounded and I have a flare on me. I can just pull it out, get to some safety, and then turn and fight. And finally, once they do give you your gun, you can use this new mechanic with what you've already discovered, and it just becomes a little bit more intuitive. So I like how they do this. Eventually, you run into these little traps, which are marked with a little light. It's an interesting choice to me, as most of the time you want to head towards the light, but in this case, you see these lights and you need to avoid them. It kind of goes a little bit against the principles that they're trying to establish, but at the same time, I don't know what else they could do. You're playing in the dark here. You need a little bit of contrast in order to make these things out. So you just have to avoid these. And honestly, these don't come into play a whole lot. I think they probably could have just done the liquid darkness pools instead, but I guess that's just a bit nitpicky. And this is where I came across my first can pyramid. And for those completionists, you can search and find these throughout the game, knocking them over for a trophy. Now, after fighting for so long with the revolver, I finally found a hunting rifle for a little bit of a stronger firepower and a new slot that I could use. As far as your pistols, you always have the revolver. Before your long firearms, you can either have a hunting rifle, a shotgun, or a pump shotgun. The hunting rifle was my favorite because it was effective at any range. Another thing in this game are these little puzzles that you come to every now and again where you typically have to operate some machinery or kick something down. And so here's one example where I just had to knock down a counterweight and it ended up lifting the elevator. I kind of like these puzzles. They're not too difficult, but they keep things a little interesting. They can be fun, and we'll definitely see more as we go. At this point, I need some garage keys so I can go take a car. And this is where I find another TV. Every time we see Alan here, it seems like he's going crazy. And it makes me wonder at this point if he is really the psychopath and this is all in his head. But I grab a car and I start driving to Barry. Now, the car sections are interesting in this game. We will have some fun discussing a little bit later, but it does kind of make sense that the car sections are in this game when you think about how Alan Wake was originally meant to be an open world game. This was the initial plan, with you seeming to be able to jump around Bright Falls in a semi-GTA style, completing missions. Apparently, though, that wasn't really working well, and so the devs changed the game to be more of a linear narrative. And honestly, I think that makes more sense with the way this game is trying to go hand in hand with the theme of writing and a novel and the novel departure. I think it makes more sense to be a linear game than have it be some open world. And I'm still getting used to some of the car controls here. I didn't even know how to exit my car, but we figure that out. And this is where I truly do discover the flare gun's power. Even though I used it against Carl Stuckey, his light was pretty much already depleted. But flare guns you can actually use against enemies before their light shield has been taken down, because the flare acts as that light and it's followed by an explosion. So not only can you fire it at enemies before their light shield is taken down, it also explodes and takes out multiple with it. This is definitely actually the best weapon in the game, and its single fire takes a little time to reload, as well as ammo being quite rare, so it's best to try to save this for the hardest encounters and for when enemies are kind of bunched up. At this point, we find where Barry is, but in order to save him, we have to take down the birds. I hate the birds. They fly at you from multiple sides and it's really hard to keep track of them. They keep coming in from different angles in this game. I really don't like it because I just found it so hard to avoid them. Now, they do get mostly defeated by the light, so your beam is your main weapon when you're trying to face them off. You focus in your beam and it basically thins the herd, and they act in little mini herds. Flares do come in handy because when they do surround you and attack you from multiple sides, you can just pop one of those out to protect you. And also, flare guns really come in handy here. They take out the birds in chunks. After this section, you rescue Barry, and he actually believes you now. He thought you were crazy before. Barry has discovered that Rose, the waitress at the diner, who is obsessed with Alan Wake, has some pages of the manuscript that the kidnapper is looking for, but she is revealed to be under a spell by the mysterious lady who handed you the keys to Cauldron Lake. Clearly, a trap has been sprung for Alan and Barry, and that is the end of episode 2. We start off episode 3 and Alan gets a call from the sheriff who's letting you know that the FBI is looking for you, and this will come into play later. But right now, you are heading to Rose, and this guy is going to lead you to her. And this is kind of one of those annoying typical game things where you have to follow someone, but you are faster than them, and so you end up having to stop every couple of seconds. Now, interestingly, there are times in this game where you actually do walk at the same pace as other characters, but not this guy. He walks a little bit slower, he's limping, he has a bad leg, and it would have been nice if they kind of slowed us to his pace as well. But this is a 2010 game. I don't think this wasn't really high on developers' minds, I think, at the time. Now, as you're getting closer to Rose's trailer, the crows fly by, and to be honest, I was traumatized by last night's encounter, but apparently Alan and Barry kind of forgot about it, so they're not as phased. It would have been cool if they said something here. Now, also on this walk is where they make mention of this writer, Thomas Zane, who used to own the island on Cauldron Lake, the one that disappeared, and love diving. This will all be important later. We meet Rose, and she is definitely not herself, and there's something bad in the coffee.
Hey, this is really good.
Because Alan and Barry get knocked out. Alan ends up having this really creepy dream, and suddenly it's nighttime, which means the Taken are out. And Alan now has less time to produce the manuscript for the kidnapper. He's in Rose's room, and you can definitely see her obsession. And it's pretty soon that we get our first glimpse of Agent Nightingale, the FBI agent who is after Alan, for some reason yet to be discovered. And Alan, knowing that he probably can't really explain much, tries to make for an escape. And this is actually one of the coolest bits of turning things on its head in this game, because we have spent all this time so far treating the darkness as the danger and the light as safety. But now you actually need to avoid the spotlights of the police cars as you are making your escape. I love how this really flips things upside down. And my only wish is that they played into this a little bit more. It would have been cool if there was a little bit more risk and reward, as Alan has to avoid some Taken, so he heads for the light, but now the police have seen him, so now he's got to go back into the darkness. And it would have been cool to see a little bit more of threading the needle between the light and the dark, and both sides having their own bit of danger. But this section also finally taught me about Alan's sprint bar, because he only actually has so much stamina before losing speed. You can't see a real bar, but you can tell when Alan pulls his shoulders back, he has a full sprint available. And when he's hunched over, he's encumbered and tired and has to move slower. So by seeing this, you can kind of get a good judge and pace your running a bit to get the best speed. Now in this section, there's another bit of storytelling that you can get in this game, and that is through these radio broadcasts, which you hear from time to time. And this is coming from the guy you met on the ferry early on that wanted to get you on his radio show. And it's interesting to listen to these. It sometimes gives you a little bit more knowledge of the town. Sometimes you hear the hype for events such as the upcoming Deer Fest. It's just that little bit of extra lore for those that want it. And actually in this escape, you end up making your way to the radio station, and this is where you first encounter these haunted objects. It's usually some sort of metal farm equipment that can only be defeated with light. Now, this haunting has occurred on the gate, so you need to start a generator, which will operate a light which you can shine on the gate to clear your path. I wanted to see what happened after this, but for some reason it kind of zoomed away. So I couldn't see what happened to the gates, but basically you find out later that most of the time it's just absorbing the lights and disappears. Now you find a flashlight, and you also find flashbang grenades, which are very powerful and very useful. You can drop them at the floor, and the flash of the light plus the bang instantly takes out the Taken. It is a little bit tough to get used to, as the flashbang is a bit delayed, so you really have to time it well, but it is a very strong weapon. And this is another section where they don't give you guns just yet, which is a great way to just get you familiar with this new mechanic, and I like that. But this is basically the last new weapon you actually get for the rest of the game. So as we get to later sections, sometimes it gets a little tedious, like you kind of want a little more, but the game does try to add some new mechanics here and there as the episodes progress. We'll see some of these later. Now I flash banged my way all the way to the radio station to meet Pat, but Hothead Nightingale is there, who can't stop calling you names of other authors the whole time, but his own hot-headedness gives Alan a chance to escape. And I do wish we got a little bit more into Alan's head as to what's going on. I mean, he's got the FBI on him right now. He should probably be a little bit more freaked out. But you find a gun and you make your way to these work lights, and these are kind of a new mechanic which you can flick on, and it removes any of the Taken's light when they cross paths with it. It's an interesting mechanic, but I don't really utilize it all too often. They're stationary, you can't rotate them, and so you kind of have to make a concerted effort to lure Taken into the light beams. Now at this point, I get pretty fully loaded up with ammo, and I actually was starting to hit a stride a bit with being able to take out the Taken, I realized for the most part I could hip fire my light to start depleting enemies' light circles early. And when they got close, I could shine it on them, which would freeze them and stun them in the light, and it would allow me to deplete their circles without using too much battery. Now my flare or my flashbang was something that I would use to get me out of a pinch, to protect me from a swarm when they were surrounding me. It was really starting to come together at this point, and I would only really get better from here. Now we make our way to the bridge, and this is where equipment really starts flying at you. So now, not only Taken, but inanimate objects all around can be a threat. And I like this. As Alan gets upgraded, the difficulty also starts ramping up. And as I get more used to the mechanics, the difficulty ramps up a bit to challenge me, and naturally I just end up getting better and better. Now here's where we get an upgrade to our flashlight. It just has a little bit more juice than it did before, and throughout the game you can find better flashlights like lamps and heavy duty lamps, which just give you a little bit more juice. Now this is where we fight our first tractor. The tractor is basically driving and rolling after you, and your objective is to close the circle of light while Taken are running after you as well. Dodge comes in handy against the tractor, especially when it's trying to ram you. But one thing is you can't really hip fire your light on the tractor to close its circle. You need to be fully focused. So it's good to have a lot of batteries because they will get drained trying to take it out. What I do is I do a lot of dodges and try to take the Taken out first and then focus on the tractor using all my batteries. This seems to work well, and it's over. At this point, you can hop in your car and the night is over. It lets you drive a little bit during the day to try to get to the coal mine where the kidnapper is supposed to meet with you. Even Alan is admitting that the events that are going on are kind of matching this textbook case of insanity. And as I'm playing through, I am questioning whether it's going to be revealed that he is just a psychopath. As you're driving around, you get to explore a little bit, but you eventually arrive at the coal mine where you stay waiting for the kidnapper. And he doesn't show up on time, but Alan stays till night, which is a big mistake. And he gets a phone call. He's got to meet him at Mirror Peak. Now, one thing this game does well is they notify you when danger is present. As you're going, things will get hazy and the wind starts blowing hard, and you know that something is going to be around the corner. And even though sometimes, especially for me, I have a hard time getting a good sense of my surroundings, there will be this nice little heads up if something is coming at you from behind. At this point, I'm navigating through the train yard and the coal mine, and of course, there's a lot of inanimate objects coming for you. Another cool section is I'm trying to get past this downed electrical current, and I need to turn the power off. So I have to cross the yard, and I can do so with my car, but I need to cross the yard to turn the lights off. And I like this risk reward. You have to shut the power off and go into complete darkness in order to make your way forward. Now there are a lot of worker lights to help me out, so I try to use them as I pass by. As I fight the inanimate objects, I do find a good strategy here. I position myself behind a pole or a rock and shine my light on them from there, so that when it does eventually try to attack me, it hits the pole or the rock instead and gets knocked off track. This makes them so much easier. You just have to try not to point your back towards any possible inanimate objects. I love seeing Alan going crazy on the TV. I keep traversing the mountains and I run into freaking birds. I hate these things. They do bait me a bit into thinking I'm safe, but I'm not. They almost do it again, but I actually make it into the mine. I went the wrong way. I thought I needed to jump into the Cauldron Lake, but nope. I end up getting trapped in one section, and this is where a bunch of enemies ambush you. The flashbang really comes in handy here to take a bunch out, and then you can clean up the rest. I got a trophy for 25 coffee mugs collected. Now to one of my favorite puzzles. You need to use the button to lift and lower these iron beams, which end up building a bridge over to the next section. When you're getting close to the top, you need to know to kick this ladder down. It's a bit hard to spot. It's not super obvious, but I definitely got to feel smart when I figured it out. So overall, I like this. Now I need to ride a cable car to another section of the mountain, and of course, they're freaking birds. I hate them. And I'm noticing that the cable cars are always breaking. How is Mirror's Peak safe to visit at all? I'm making my way, and one thing I love is they drop objects right out of the sky, right in front of you. The timing on this gives you quite a jump scare, and I love how it all works out so that it doesn't fall on your head. This happens quite a bit in the game, and yeah, I never got hit on the head or taken out by any of this. Now I have to cross a bridge where, of course, the Taken are surrounding me on both sides. So what I do is I push my way forward. so I don't get surrounded. I use my flare gun for crowd control, and I finish the last guy off with my revolver. Now here's something I really don't like with the manuscript pages. This one I pick up, and it lets me know that I am stuck in a clinic with Dr. Hartman, and I think I'm seeing Alice, but it's really Hartman, and I've been a patient of his for a while now. This just ruins the surprise of it all later. I don't really like this. I think it would have been better as a mystery. Another thing I don't really like is the next cutscene. The kidnapper is explaining that he made everything up, that he didn't actually have Alice because he was under the control of the dark presence. But he's explaining this as I'm walking towards him, and when I get to a certain section, the cutscene is triggered, which cuts him off from the rest of his explanation and just shows him in sadness as he gets taken away. I think it would have been better if this whole thing was a cutscene, because I definitely missed some stuff here and missed some of the details that I think would have been helpful. But this ends episode 3, and on episode 4, I'm clearly not surprised when I see Alice's face and it turns out, no, it's Dr. Hartman. I'm not even sure why Alan acted surprised at this point. He just read it to himself. At this point, I'm following Hartman, and actually this time we're following him at the right pace. Dr. Hartman tries to convince you that this whole thing is in your head and basically you are crazy. And at this point, I'm honestly thinking, I agree. I'm wondering if this is the case. I mean, every time I see the TV, it's showing Alan in this crazed, demented state. And yeah, losing his wife could be causing this and could be the way that he's coping, because he doesn't really seem too disturbed by her disappearance. I mean, he's taken it a little rather well, considering how mortifying it would actually be. Ultimately, I do like how this game kind of has you guessing and questioning your own self.
I wasn't ready for another shot, so I went along with it. He had to be lying. But under the influence of the drug he had given me, I had to fight not to believe his words.
Emerson here is a troll, but I think he also seems to know something.
Scary, scary, scary.
And we run into these old guys that we saw in the diner, the Anderson brothers, Odin and Thor.
I'd like to bash his head in with a hammer.
Oh, he'd love to fish out our secrets, but he has no clue. He's not crazy enough. Not crazy like us, Sonny. Yeah!
They are obsessed with Vikings and Norse gods, but they're also rockers, and they think Alan is Thomas Zane. They want him to go find the sign on their farm, so I'm sure we'll do just that. Now, upstairs, we find a QR code, and if you actually scan this, it takes you to a YouTube video on Remedy's channel, which shows you more of Alan going crazy in the writer's room, just like you see on the TVs. There are more QR codes throughout this game, and it's nice. It gives you a little bit extra. Now, during the night, the Anderson brothers go crazy, and this actually gives you the chance you need to steal the keys where you can gather the manuscript pages. And as you're going through Hartman's area towards his office, you find Barry just hanging out with Alan's cutout. But apparently he was kidnapped by Hartman. This part just seems a little bit like we're trying to force Alan and Barry back together. But anyways, Hartman walks in, but it is nighttime, and so the dark presence comes for him, and he's gone. Look at Alan's smug smile on his face. In this moment, I'm like, did he do this? Now, this is another issue I have with the manuscript pages, because at this point, you're in deep in conflict. The rooms are collapsing around you, things are flying at you, but you can just pick up a manuscript page and just stop everything and read it. I really think they should have put them in different areas, a little bit more safer areas, because this definitely breaks some of the immersion. I'm breaking out, but Barry is on the other side of this gate, so I have to fight parts of the house. And I make my way through this garden maze, fighting Taken to get to him. Now, there's this part where Barry has to unlock the gate, but before he can, you need to fight some Taken. The section is actually a bit hard because I thought I would just funnel them up the stairs, but the Taken can climb the sides and they can overwhelm you pretty well. I died a couple times to this section, but then something interesting happened as I almost got through it. I was low on health and near the door as Barry opened the gate, but before I could escape, the enemy got a good swing at me and it killed me. But it pushed my body over the threshold, so I ended up triggering the cutscene. I was wondering if I was actually going to get away with this and move on to the next scene, or whether this might soft lock my game. But after a little break in the cutscenes, it brought me right back. I ended up having to redo the section legitimately, and then finally I went back through the threshold and it re-showed me the cutscene, but then continued on further. It brought me to Barry and Alan crashing off the side of a mountain, and they end up getting separated, both deciding to meet up again at the Anderson brothers' farm. Alan doesn't have any weapons on him, but he does find a flashlight. And this section is hard because Alan can't sprint forever, so it's a little sloppy as you run through parts of the forest trying to get from light to light. As you make your way, you see a bright light, and the voice of this strange spaceman leaves you a page of the manuscript. And you realize that this spaceman has been the one leaving this trail of breadcrumbs for you. Significantly though, this is not the one leaving the yellow markings and the ammo. We'll get to that later. Eventually though, you do find weapons, which makes the rest of the trek to the farm easier. Things get a little meta here as you get to this cabin, and the guy that we saw from the jail cell dies from a taken attack. And while he's dying, he makes fun of the way this is unfolding like a bad movie, and basically says it's bad writing, insulting Alan.
Like a real bad follow-up to a real good movie? Who wrote this crap anyway?
But the TV here also explains quite a bit.
I've written myself into the story. I'm now the protagonist. This feels like a terrible risk, but it's the only way to save Alice. I'll be bound by the events of the story just as much as anyone else who's been woven into it. The story must stay true for this to work. There have to be victims along the way, near escapes, cliffhangers. In a horror story, it can't be certain that the hero will succeed or even survive. He almost has to die. I'll write my own escape into the story next. I need help. Zane's going to be the one who will help me. I'll make it happen.
So it does seem that whatever's happening in this writer's room is where the departure book has been written. Another thing I haven't mentioned yet that I love about this game is Alan narrating his own actions as he goes. It makes me feel in some way like I'm reading a book, which if I'm being honest, I haven't actually done in a long time, so getting the feeling like I'm reading is pretty satisfying. Now you drive to the farm and past a crazy crane, and you get to the most fun part of the game. Barry, the complete badass that he is, has made it by himself to the farm and has met you on the Anderson brothers stage, and we start playing some rock music while hordes attack you. And this is just pure fun. I don't want to play the music because I don't want to get a copyright claim, but it's just a pure rock out and I love it. They give you lots of ammo and they just let you let loose on all the taken as they come at you in hordes. The electric guitar is blaring and Barry is sitting in the control booth trying to keep the lights on. The game checkpoints you too, so if you do die, you don't have to start all over. But still, you're just having fun, and even Barry tries to remind you to enjoy the moment. Eventually, you get them all and you just need to get through certain parts of the farm.
Alan Wake here has something to say. What's that, Al?
I'm Alan Wake. I'm always right about everything. And if I don't get my way, I'll sulk all day long. I'm always intense and moody. It makes me very attractive and mysterious. Right now, I'm just standing here because I need my best friend Barry to carry me. But that's okay. I can just take him for granted.
Now, after making your way through some of the barns, a huge farm vehicle attacks you. But I have a heavy-duty lantern, which I make quick use of right away, basically defeating it before the Taken can even get to me. It makes this takedown a lot easier than I thought it would be. And I definitely feel like I was getting the hang of the mechanics at this point. Finally, we make it to the Andersons' house. We get the lights on and we play the Lady of the Light song, which is a message telling you to find essentially the crazy Lady of the Light, Mrs. Weaver, and that she is going to help you solve the mystery. Barry and Alan celebrate by getting a little drunk, and they have some funny conversations.
I'm gonna stick by you, no matter what, ever, Al. Sure. Like a brother.
I'm a writer, goddammit.
Correct.
If I just wanted to, I could write 10 books a year. And they'd be the best books that year.
No, you couldn't.
That's right, I couldn't. But I could, because I'm a writer.
What? What do they put in this stuff?
After you drift off, the game does something pretty cool. You become an out-of-body observer, and the game shifts you to essentially the second-person perspective as you witness a recreation of the events that took place when Alice went missing. In this moment, it fills in the gaps missing from that first week. Alan can't find Alice in the lake, and Jagger, the lady in black, beckons you out and into the study in bird leg cabin, guilting you and getting you to write a story, essentially trying to make herself more powerful. Now, as Alan is writing, he weaves Thomas Zane into the story as a way to set him free from the clutches. Zane, who liked diving, is in a big diving suit which is full of light, and he rescues Alan. Alan ends up escaping in a car, but he's only kind of half awake, and it ends up crashing. And this fills in the missing gaps of the week. Basically, Alan nearly finishes his next novel, Departure, in that week. And it seems that Thomas Zane is going around leaving you pages of that manuscript as you relive essentially the exact events that you wrote. And this ends episode 4. Episode 5 begins with you and Barry in jail, and Agent Nightingale continues to just be reckless, to the point that Sheriff Breaker is extremely skeptical of him and has seen enough of the craziness unfolding that she trusts Alan. Nightingale literally ends up reading about his own demise, and he realizes it as it all comes true, and the darkness gets him. I do like this use of the manuscripts. Sarah lets you get your things, which clearly are not your things. You get a weaker flashlight, and I'm not sure if you have the same ammo, but who's counting? Anyways, you make your way through the town with Sheriff Breaker to get to the Choppa, and there are a couple fights throughout this town, and you get to see some of the decorations for Deerfest. Sheriff Breaker is actually a really good shot. I noticed that certain sections she ends up taking anyone out before I even have a chance to fire. And of course, Barry continues to prove that he's a freaking badass as he jumps and dives inanimate objects. You keep going and you make your way to the church, where you have to defend this area for a little bit so that Breaker can open the door. And this is where Barry fully unlocks his badass Rambo mode. He wraps himself in Christmas lights and he's got the flaming eye of Mordor over his head.
You didn't like that one? A tough audience. Well, I got plenty more.
What are the Christmas lights for?
Protection, man. Like garlic against vampires.
We get to a section where we're about to take off in the helicopter, and there's a little bit of a zone defense before it can happen. Now, one thing I didn't even notice is there's all these propane tanks all over. I didn't realize that you could actually shoot these things and they would help me take out some Taken, but I'll figure out that that's a mechanic later. I do use the workers' lights though, which helps me out in this section. Eventually, I get to the chopper, and of course, frickin' birds attack you so you fall off. So now Alan is on his own, and I'm making my way to the transformer yard. This is where I notice the propane tanks finally and use them to my advantage. Another mechanic that gets introduced here is these electric lines in the transformer yard, which you can lure Taken into. One thing though is I didn't really find a whole lot of opportunities to actually use this. I wish there was a little bit more of a way to set this up or lure the Taken better, but I just didn't find that many opportunities. At this point, I need to get to this bridge and I need to spin it into place. So I go to the control room and I press the button and it actually just keeps spinning. This is actually kind of a fun section, and even though you have to fight birds, I still enjoyed it. You have to jump on and off the bridge as it spins at the right spots, and it was just pretty enjoyable. I liked this. But eventually you arrive to meet Miss Weaver, who has been waiting for you. She's supposed to give something to Alan in the well-lit room, and Zane put her up to this. But in order to get to the well-lit room, you have to cut some of the power. So Alan goes out, and it's a fun little puzzle here. You have to flip these switches to activate these bridges, and then you have to make your way back. There's a few Taken fights as well, but not too hard. And this allows you to get to the well-lit room. Now on your way, this is where you find out that Mrs. Weaver has been the one writing in yellow and leaving supplies throughout the world. And you get a little bit more important lore here as well, as Weaver explains how Zane lost his love, Barbara Jagger, and tried to use writing to save her, but ended up failing. You realize that Zane has a lot of echoes to Alan's experience, and that he lost Barbara, who is the lady in black, and he's been unable to save her, and has essentially turned her into the dark presence. It's a threat that this could possibly happen to Alice too, if Alan is unable to save her. Now Alan finds out over phone that the helicopter crashed, and so he diverts course to the well-lit room to save his friends. But Barry, of course, is fine, and so is Breaker. Barry has survived some of the most brutal crashes in this game. There's this very bad car crash, and now a helicopter crash. Honestly, I was expecting him to die at some point, but he just can't be stopped. And now that you're reunited, you have to meet up again with Weaver. Now, there are quite a few encounters as you head towards Weaver, and to be honest, at this point, the fighting does get a little bit tedious, especially as I'm pretty eager to just get more of the story as to what the heck is going on. It doesn't really help that you don't get a ton of new weapons or mechanics to have fun with, but there is this really fun section at the top of the dam, because you have to run as things are falling apart and objects are dropping dropping right in front of you. It's crazy. It's crazy how they managed to get the timing of these drops to fall so well. But I do love this action sequence. And we reunite again with Weaver. And we get to the well-lit room, and you get a page from Thomas Zane about a young Alan and the clicker story, which ends up being brought into this story. And this ends episode 5. Episode 6 starts with a flashback, and Alan is hungover from a late night bender. He watches his own interview on a Tonight Show type show, where he talks about his latest novel, which killed Alex Casey at the end. It's been a pretty controversial choice for an ending. And he also talks about fights that he gets into with paparazzi. You get to watch this as Alan watching the TV. And one thing that kind of bothers me, and it's bothered me throughout the whole game, but I haven't really mentioned it yet, is when you are meant to focus in on something, you have to hold and you have to keep holding the L3 button to zoom to it. You just have to keep holding it, or else you just zoom back out. It gets pretty uncomfortable to just keep this held. I wish you could just toggle it or something. Now, a little Easter egg for this scene is that the other guest that's sitting on the couch next to Alan is none other than the writer of this game, Sam Lake. Alice comes home and gets into a brief fight with Alan, but they make up and they resolve to go on vacation to Bright Falls. Now, back in the present with the clicker, Alan makes his way back to the lake, and he needs to do it alone. Driving around during the day, the world honestly feels a bit empty. You don't run into anyone on your drive. There's no cars, no people, and you can just steal any car that you come across. They could have done a little bit more to make the world feel a bit more alive in this section. And it's also a little bit weird that there's just a crash in the middle of the road and no one's there. But I guess you could argue that the drivers have become taken, as it quickly switches to darkness and now you have to fight. Hop back in a car, and after driving to a bit, you get to the Majestic Hotel. It's a total optional section that you totally could miss, but I love this because exploring this hotel, you end up finding Nightingale's room where he was staying, and you can see aspects of how crazy he had become. I don't think they really answer what caused him to go so crazy, whether he had been touched by the darkness a little bit at some point or was just a loose cannon. But we get a little bit more Nightingale teases later. As you make your way to Cauldron Lake, it has several fighting sections over the bridge, around the farms, a construction yard, and another crane. All the while, you're using the mechanics that you have come to know well. It feels kind of like a gauntlet that you must overcome to get to your goal. It definitely feels like the end game. One of the harder sections is actually heading to Mirror Peak. There's a bunch of abandoned buildings, and you have to make your way through the yard to an abandoned church. And you get to this big headlight that you can use to take enemies out pretty well, but if you aren't successful, you have to start all the way back at the beginning of the yard. So it's a bit of a harder section. They also introduce a little bit of cart pushing into this. Doesn't really feel super necessary. It's kind of one of those last minute add-ons, and you only use it a few times. But riding down the cart is fun. And this is actually another enjoyable bird section. But then it soon turns into an annoying bird section. Anyways, keep making my way and the fight continues. Now boats and train cars are falling out of the sky. The end section does take a little bit to get through, but it's pretty fun, and since you kind of know it's the end, I'm just having some fun using what I have. As you get towards the end, there's this darkness tornado, which gets wider as you go through part of the mine, and now you have to defeat the tornado. You can destroy some flying objects, and you need to watch out for gaps and watch out for other flying objects, but basically you just need to shoot the center of the tornado with flare guns. One thing though is the auto aim is really annoying. It keeps dragging my aim upwards towards flying objects, but I just have to drag it back down and finish the job. It actually wasn't that hard. And at this point, Alan does what he is supposed to do. He clicks the clicker and he dives into Cauldron Lake. Now he wakes up in a dark reflection of his apartment, and he has to shine the light on the words clicker in order to get it back. Zane shows up, and so too does your evil twin, Mr. Scratch, who is going to be showing up to your friends when you are gone. That's a scary thought. There are more words that you end up having to light up to get to Birdleg Cabin. And this is your moment to finally take out Jagger, shoving your arm into her stomach and clicking the clicker. And this allows Alan to write the ending to Departure. And he realizes in order to save Alice, he needs to sacrifice himself. So he writes the ending such that they essentially switch places. Alice wakes up alone on the edge of the lake, and Alan is nowhere to be found. Deerfest goes on, and people are happy except for Rose. And in the background, it looks like Nightingale. And we end up seeing Alan stuck writing in Bird Lake Cabin, and that actually ends the game. It's a beautiful, bittersweet ending. It's a little non-conclusive. Because what exactly did happen to Alan? Well, that's where we really should dig into the 2 DLCs or special episodes, which I actually think are very important and critical to the story. So let's dig into them. The first one is called The Signal, and this is where we find Alan stuck in the dark place, essentially some sort of shadow realm or dream world. There are some familiarities that you can recognize, but everything is a bit wrong. You start off in Bright's Diner and everything is transparent like a ghost. You're heading towards the bathroom, Zane contacts you and the mirror shows Wake going crazy. You end up getting your light and your gun from here. It's very weird, but this is the dark place. And in this DLC, you collect alarm clocks and you also find cardboard cutouts of other characters that you met in the first game. Now, throughout the DLC, you get a GPS, which is supposed to give you signal to get to Zane and help you get out of there. The DLC makes a lot of use of the mechanic that we found at the very end of the game, where you need to light up real words for those objects to actually appear. And it uses it in some pretty interesting ways as you navigate the strange landscape that keeps shifting around you. The words can give you ammo. They can give you memories even. They can also give you a path. They can give you ladders and bridges, and they can also be used in combat. You can use them to blast furnaces so that you can take out any Taken that attack you. And they even give you Barry to help you get through some areas. It's an interesting mechanic. It's not my favorite, like it would get old to play the whole game like this, but for a DLC mission, it's pretty cool how they play with it. A cool section here is the bad words section, where you would spawn monsters if you actually lit these words up. So just be careful not to shine your light on anything. And I didn't end up shining my light, so I got through this pretty well. This DLC does have a lot of fighting, but you follow the signal and eventually you drop down and you see a memory of Alan posing for some real photos with Alice taking them. And ironically, he can't wait to get out of these clothes. The same clothes that he, by the way, literally wears throughout the whole game. You get transported back to your apartment, and this is where you catch up finally with Zane and realize that Alan is trapped in his own nightmare. But Zane disappears and then you have to fight the TVs. You've been seeing these TVs throughout this whole DLC going crazy, and now you have to fight them. It's actually a pretty tough section, harder than really anything in the game because there are waves of inanimate objects as well as Taken coming for you, but you also have to take down the TVs. You can hide behind the iron beams and they protect you from the inanimate objects. And there are warnings about Taken coming, so it isn't too bad, but eventually you do have to push forward further into the room, which leaves you a little bit more exposed for objects to hit you. But ultimately, I did find some other iron beams to hide behind and take out the remaining TVs. Opens the wall and one last boat awaits you with flying bird books, but that takes care of it. Ultimately, though you've defeated this, you're still stuck in the dark place. And this leaves you on a cliffhanger, which brings us to special feature 2. The writer, which I think is really the true ending to this game. The writer begins with an apparition of Hartman, almost confusing you to think that maybe Alan really did lose his mind. Maybe he is just going crazy. But Hartman disappears and you end up with Barry's apparition. The word mechanics are back and you use it for some puzzles, clearing the path for you. And you start by fighting your way through Hartman's lodge, where you can meet Zane, who tells you that you need to reach your sleeping self in order to escape your dream. And this is where things get awesome for this DLC, because you have to make your way to the lighthouse, which I knew that would have to come back into play somewhere. But you have to make your way to the lighthouse and you have to light up words that end up creating a bridge across the lake towards it. And if you've played only up, it has very similar vibes to this. Basically, by shining your light, you're spawning various assets of the game that are floating around in the sky that you need to jump on and traverse from object to object to make your way. This was honestly so much fun. This was the most fun I think I've had in the game. And the main game was fun. Interesting things happen too here, like the house is spinning, which ends up revealing a new path. And you have to navigate around the storm, circling up around it. It was a lot of fun, but at some point you get back to land and you have to fight through some enemies, through a pipe system, which is a little bit of a maze, and you're taking out the Taken. Now this pipe leads you to this basically huge hamster wheel. It makes you run from room to room. Stairs were kind of a bit weird here. You had to really wait for it to get down to a certain spot, especially if you were too fast, but ultimately you keep moving and you get through different parts of the game that you've actually experienced before. Eventually though, it gets really confusing how to progress. I was stuck circling an area forever, trying to figure out the way through it. I kept going around in circles. It turned out that I needed to wait for gravity to end up opening this hatch and then run through it. But this definitely wasn't super clear, and I kept looking in the wrong direction, so it took me a while to figure this out. Eventually though, I did figure it out, and it takes you to a recreation of the well-lit room where you find an elevator to take you out. You have a few more encounters here, and puzzle, which has you lighting up electric poles. It allows you to start the generator to operate machinery and get a bridge across the ravine. And finally, you get to a room with an apparition of Hartman talking to Wake, only he has a TV for a head, and he's tacitly agreeing to everything that Hartman is diagnosing, all the way to having him hear audio of Alice basically ripping Alan a new one, saying how much she hates him. And this is really testing Alan's psyche. But he resolves to push further towards the lighthouse. Alan continues fighting, and there's another gauntlet of enemies here where a bunch attack you. But if you light up the word clear, it basically clears all the enemies for a brief period of time. This can get a bit overwhelming, and sometimes I just end up running my way through rather than trying to clear and fight everything. But finally, after a long fought battle, you get to the lighthouse. You go up the stairs, reaching the very top, which brings you back to Diver's Isle and the bird leg cabin. And before you can enter, you end up having to fight Barry and apparitions of both Dr. Hartman and the Anderson brothers that have all turned on you, trying to keep you from reaching that writer's room. Now, this section did take me a couple tries, but it's not too hard. You just need to follow their sprinting apparitions, lighting them up until their circle closes, and then once it is, you just pump some bullets into them. Birds will come to you at time to time, but if you handle them first, you can get them out of your hair and you can concentrate on the apparition. It's a bit harder when you have both Anderson brothers coming for you, but I ended up cornering one of them and he kind of got, I don't know if it was glitched, but he seemed kind of stuck there, and this helped me get through. Barry is the final boss, but you defeat him in much the same way, and you head into the room where you finally find yourself sleeping, having the nightmare. And this reconnection awakens Alan. Well, to an extent. He's still in the dark place, but he's now much more clear-headed. And so he resolves to try to get out. And Alan realizes that the only way to get out is to write a sequel. And that's how it ends. Just like the beginning, really, with a lot of questions that are left unanswered and the desire for more. And it's true, this game really sits with you, and even after my playthrough, I can't quite get the story out of my mind. I keep thinking, like, did Thomas Zane write Alan into existence? Or did Alan write Thomas Zane into existence? Is there some sort of a circling, self-fulfilling prophecy going on here? Why do they show Nightingale in that window? What's going on? A lot of questions. I honestly don't even know how people who played this game back in 2010 have been dealing with the wait to get some of these things answered, because it took 13 years for a sequel to come out, which I'm very eager to try, but that's for another video. And so all in all, how does Alan Wake hold up? Has it been worth all this hype? Where does it belong on the ultimate video game tier list? Despite some issues that I had with things like the manuscript pages, despite some character actions not always making total sense, some gameplay sections that I thought could be better and others that dragged on a little long, and a little emptiness in the world, despite all that, this game is amazing. The story is captivating. The unique gameplay mechanics are a breath of fresh air. I love the characters. I love the tone. I think it really strikes well with what it's inspired by. I love the way the story sits with you and leaves you wanting more. And I love how it wraps up very nicely with the beginning. It basically tells you that you're not going to get the answers to all your questions. And for all these reasons, I have to give Alan Wake an A on the ultimate video game tier list. I feel like this game was just made for me. I'm surprised it's taken me so long to play. I love how it sparks my imagination in ways that few games do, and I'm eager to find out what happens. But where do other video games belong on this ultimate video game tier list? Well, that's why you should subscribe, so you don't miss out on the next deep dive. And I want to say a special thank you to my YouTube members for joining the Bowel Movement. But otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.